Hello, and welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so grateful for those of you who support this podcast via Patreon subscription. I know I mention this almost every episode, but you really are amazing and vital to making this podcast possible. I'm humbled and inspired by your ongoing support. As of the last episode, the Organic Wine Podcast has been downloaded over 100,000 times. I honestly couldn't have made it this far without you. Thank you so much. If you aren't a Patreon subscriber and would like to support this podcast, if you'd like more people to ask the questions and consider the ideas that we discuss on this podcast, the link to the Patreon will be in the show notes, as well as on the support page at organicwinepodcast.com. A small contribution makes a huge impact. Thank you. Hey, I want to say something to those of you who sell wines and ciders in the U.S., retail or wholesale. Cider is this incredible, untapped opportunity. Pun intended. The problem, as I see it, is that the drinking public continues to associate cider with the bland, insipid versions that are widely distributed in bars across the U.S. and served as a Swedish alternative to beer. It's not, and it's our job to change that. The best ciders are terroir-driven, vintage-dependent, sparkling wines. So here's my request. Let's stop selling cider with our beer list. Let's stop listing cider with beer on the menu and start listing it in the sparkling wine section of the menu. Let's get people to start associating cider with champagne and Cremant and Cava and Prosecco, not Budweiser. My guest for this episode is Dave Carr of Raging Cider and Mead, and he's helping to redefine what cider can be and where it can come from. Dave makes cider in San Diego County, and for those of you unfamiliar with California, that's south of me here in Los Angeles. We often look north for great cider cultures, and I'll admit that's why it took me so long to have Dave on the podcast. But it turns out there's an old, very special, and pretty outstanding cider culture just over an hour south of Los Angeles. In fact, once you hear Dave's description of growing cider here, you may begin to see it as one of the best places to grow cider. I don't want to give too much away, but you're going to find out about a unique population of banana slugs, the rich apple and pear history of gold rush town Julian, California, which is at 42,000 feet and about an hour south of me, where Dave is helping to rebuild and regenerate old, historic, and neglected orchards. You'll also hear about a seedling pear named Screaming Weasel, a perry named Perry-Farrell, the quest for the Palomar Giant, sweet meads, cysers, and pyments, Dave's approach to orchard polyculture, including cover cropping with collards, composting with mushrooms, and mulching with spent mushroom substrate, alley cropping with asparagus, beans, and squash, as well as looking on the bright side of orchard pests and how to manage them despite lazy cats, a problem with which I'm all too familiar. That's right, I'm looking at you, Robin. In addition to renewing legacy orchards and farming his home orchard and other local orchards in a beyond organic way, Dave is caretaking old historic orchards for a local tribe council that preserves land from development. And he's trying to develop locally adapted seedling apples and pears to create a uniquely Southern California cider culture. You'll hear about all of this and more, and how you can taste his diverse array of natural, regional ciders, meads, and co-ferments at his tap room in San Marcos. Enjoy. Hey, Dave, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thanks for doing this. I was looking forward to this, and it's kind of been a long time coming. I've been following what you've been up to, and I just feel like a lot of things coalesced. Is like you got in touch with me recently, and I just started looking a little more deeply into what you were doing, and a few things triggered for me that made me feel like I was totally neglectful in not having talked to you sooner. So I'm glad we're finally talking. And part of that is just, you are part of the closest to me and representational of my home region for cider, which I just didn't really, until I started digging into what you're doing, didn't realize how much of a really cool cider scene there is in Southern California. And that's what you're doing. Can you talk about? I mean, just please introduce yourself a little bit and your cidery, meadery.
Well, my name's Dave Carr. We're a small family cidery, meadery called Raging Cider and Mead. We're here in San Diego County. We source most of our apples in the local mountains, either from orchards we manage or orchards of friends of ours. So, and we have everywhere from Julian to Palomar Mountain. So we have a pretty diverse growing region here. It's not all palm trees and beaches.
Yeah, what's the elevation of those mountains where I remember some of the higher elevation places where you're getting apples?
We have orchards that range from about 3,800 feet in elevation up to 5,400 feet in elevation. And then our own personal orchards actually down at 1,800 feet in the foothills, which has become kind of an experimental thing for what apples will produce when we have lower chill years. Some years we get 900 chill hours, some years we get 350. So it's been kind of a fun little experiment.
I want to dig a little bit more into that because I have some questions for you. But what about your honey? Where does that come from?
We source from all local beekeepers. Hopefully my daughter, at some point, she has all the equipment, will start setting up beehives that we can source from as well. But yeah, all local beekeepers, mostly between San Marcos Vista, Escondido, Valley Center, and then up around Ramona and Julian as well.
Nice. And I said apples, but you're also getting a lot of pears. And as I understand it, pears are actually really, they seem to like Palomar Mountain in the area around there. Is that right? You like a lot of wild or feral pears. Is that right?
Actually, yeah, mostly in Julian. They're up on Palomar too, but I find a lot of wild and seedling pears up in the Julian area. One orchard we manage up there has, I think at last count now, we're up over 30 wild pear trees. Many of them are just very young, just maybe a foot or two or three tall. But we have, I think, about 20 something of those that are producing to some extent.
Like all different, obviously, varieties because they're sort of seedling type things.
Yeah. There's some. We have one called Screeching. We call Screeching Weasel because you can't even swallow it. I tried swallowing the juice from one time, and it felt like someone shoved sandpaper down my throat for 2 days.
But you made cider out of it?
Yeah, we make it's in a perry that we make. We have two actually. It's originally we did one called Neglected Perry, which was a blend of wild pears and Lincoln pears, and then last year we released our first Perry Feral, which is all wild and seedling pears foraged from around the county.
Yeah, and I'm looking at an empty bottle of Perry Feral on my desk right now because I ordered a bunch of your ciders not that long ago, and they're already all gone. And I hung on to this bottle because this was absolutely my favorite. I'm a Perry fanatic in some ways, and this was just so good. And I was like, I can't believe this is like growing right here in Southern California, and then I haven't come across this before, so you can expect. And it's got a fun name. We were just talking about the name Perry Feral and the TTB giving you a little bit of a hassle about that.
Yeah, well, they were at the bottom of the label. It said Sparkling Perry, so they insisted on me putting sparkling in front of Perry Feral, and I asked them why, and they said, "Well, we know what you're trying to do here, and we want to have sparkling in front of it." So I let it go. I'm going to change it next year so we don't say Sparkling Perry on the bottom and see if I can just get away with Perry Feral. So
nice. It's so good. And can you talk a little bit about how you got into this? Like, what's your story? Like, how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Well, I actually first fell in love with cider when I was 13 and I was in England visiting family. All my parents are from there, and so we would go back quite often. And I realized I could drink in pubs because I was tall, and I didn't like the English ales, so I actually fell in love with cider at that time. But unfortunately, here in the U.S., you could never find ciders that were like that. But about, I think, 12, 13 years ago, my wife had to go gluten-free. So I started making cider for her, first from store-bought juice. And then I was looking, we have apple trees on our property. So I started pressing juice from those, and it came out pretty good. And eventually, my wife just pushed me to start a cidery. So that's how I ended up here. And I love it. And I met people up in the mountains where I could source more apples. So it seemed like it would be a viable option.
And talk about like how did you get into the sort of approach that you have? I mean, you're making essentially natural cider, right? This is uninoculated. You're obviously foraging wild stuff, feral stuff, seedling stuff, but you're also managing the orchards that you're managing organically or better. Can you talk a little bit about that and where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, we've always farmed pretty much organically, and it's evolved to become more and more organic, or beyond, actually beyond organic, for years. And so when we started orcharding more, I just incorporated those ideals and just kept doing research on how to do it with trees. So, I read Michael Phillips and various other authors, and just online things, and just I actually, so this all comes from back when my son was 12. He got cancer, and so our whole thing has been since then to really avoid pesticides, herbicides, that sort of thing in our food supply, and so that informed the direction we went with our farming and orcharding.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that. That's a pretty incredible story.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, he's alive today, and I'm battling another one right now, but he's doing really well with it. So.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. Um, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm curious also how did that translate into the cider making? Did you
Well,
was that just a
when I was making,
continuation of the same? Yeah.
yeah, it was like, well, first I started with store bought juice. So obviously I was using lab yeast. I brewed beer for like 20 years prior to even starting the cidery thing. So I kind of approached it from that direction. But then I was buying juice from Trader Joe's, which was only flash pasteurized, and I left some out in the garage, and a couple of the bottles started fermenting on their own. So I just poured them in and let them go, and that came out pretty good. And then when we were pressing our own apples, I was like, well, the juice started fermenting right away, so I just let that go, and it came out well. And then I started researching. There's actually 3 natural cideries around us. Wineries around us that are doing natural wine. So that also kind of spurred me on to go down that path, and so that's how we ended up. I love the complexity of what it creates versus kind of that monotone of a lab fermented cider, lab yeast fermented cider.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's well. I mean, and it is. There's like a great range that I tasted in all of your ciders, and thanks for including that one. That was sort of the what was it?
Oh, the
It was big.
co-ferment.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, no, the one that was the big bottle. Was it a co-ferment? I thought it was just more like an amalgamation of the vintage. Like it was a.
No, I think that was a co-ferment of Viognier and then a field blend of apples.
Maybe that was it then.
Yeah.
Maybe, and maybe that's why I liked it. I'm a big, wine grape. I love grapes, as it turns out. But
Yeah. And we've been
that was
doing co-ferments for about 4 or 5 years now.
right on. Yeah, I love. I mean, and before we move on past like, your cidery packaging and everything like that. So raging cider, and you have your sort of icon, your mascot emblem logo is this little punk rock apple with a mohawk of apple leaves and a little
Yeah.
like looks like leather vest who's moshing basically.
Yeah.
It looks like, right? I
Yeah, I
love
mean,
it.
when my wife and I were kids, we were in the punk rock in the early '80s, and so that kind of just grew. That logo and kind of the theme grew out of that kind of attitude, I guess, or that part of our life.
That's great. And the peripheral, I notice the apple has a microphone as well.
Yeah, of course,
A
he's the
little
singer.
guy. That's great. So so I wanted to ask you a little bit about growing, and what you've noticed from growing apples in Southern California. Like, I mean, for me, especially if you've worked with the low chill apples, I'm just finding like almost like like they bloom twice. Do you ever see that where you're getting like two
Yeah, we get
blooms?
that with Anna apples in particular,
Yes,
are
yes.
famous for that. In fact, I've talked to someone down that lives down by the beach, and they've gotten up to 3 crops in a year off of an Anna apple, which is
Yeah.
blew my mind even because I've gotten 2, and typically we'll get the first one in the summer, which is a pretty good crop, and then we'll get a small crop in the fall time.
Yeah.
Um, and then Dorset Golden will do it a little bit, but not as much.
Yeah, Dorset. I don't know what I planted something that has golden in it. I don't know if it's Dorset golden or golden russet, but it is. Yeah, it. I mean, the apples were basically ripe a month ago. They've already been eaten by the raccoons in my backyard. So
Yeah,
both
it would
them
be
and the Anna are barren at this point. And I've realized I need to pay a little more attention to those raccoons and let them know they're not welcome. Um, but
yeah, I'm
yeah.
playing schools right now.
There you go. Yeah. Um, I'm guessing organics is a little bit easier, right? Like you're probably not getting mildew pressure. I mean, I have like Fuji in my backyard as well, and I haven't sprayed it in 10 years and have never had an issue and have huge crops every year. Are you finding that as well? Are you no spray with anything or
Yeah,
how are you managing?
we're no spray beyond foliar sprays for
Right.
of compost teas and fish emulsion and that sort of thing. But we're no spray. I did get a bad because of the really wet spring. I actually, for the first time in our orchard here at our home, got our first fire blight.
Oh, wow.
Infection. So I did have to do some treating for that, though it was all with OMRI approved things. But yeah, and I did a bunch of trimming, so my trees look not very impressive this year because I had to cut out a fair amount of wood.
Oh, wow. Was that because this cool, wet spring that we had?
Yeah, cool wet spring, lots and lots of foggy, misty days this spring while everything
Yeah.
was in bloom. And so our earlier apples, the ones that bloom first, like the Carr crabs, mostly the hislops. So the hislops have a long bloom period. So I did run into some problems with it. And the Wixons, those all were fine, but I had a lot of problems with a little bit of the hislop, the Roxbury rust. It's the black twigs, the pink pearls, pink pearmain. I had to do a lot of cutting on that, and then a couple of our quince as well that bloom a little bit later had some fire blight issues. So,
Oh, wow. Nice. So what are you into now? Like what's exciting you and tripping your trigger in terms of like the growing or the making? What's where are you headed right now?
right now, I mean, I'm kind of excited about stuff we're doing out in the field. The orchard we manage down at Quatai, which has been a 5-year project, is last year was supposed to have its first harvest and was looking good, and then we had 2 late freezes. So basically, what the East Coast is going through right now, we experienced that last year here in San Diego, and people are like, "What?" And in San Diego, but yeah, we had late freezes in May too. And
Wow.
between the 2 of them, they wiped out our plum crop first, and then they wiped out, especially at the Guatai orchard, wiped out 95% of our apples. And then the 5% that were left got knocked off when we had this hurricane remnant blew through here in the fall before they were ripe. So
Right.
that's that last 5. I think I got a half a bushel out of 900 trees last year.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Yeah, but
So
I know
it was
East
heartbreaking.
Coast
But this year, it's. In fact, we had to go down and thin because the trees were so heavy with fruit. So, fingers crossed, we'll get a decent crop this year.
I
And
so I've a, Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that's been exciting me is this: we've been doing some work with an old orchard up on Palomar, and there's a lost apple from. It's not lost per se, but no one knows about it. It's called the Palomar Giant, which was really popular in LA and San Diego in the early 1900s, and was the only source was from Palomar. I believe it was a seedling, as far as I can find out so far. And we've been searching for one of the trees, and the first one we found was dead. Can't find the second one in the state park that's supposed to be there. And then there's a property I can't get out of the owners, but there's a third property, and they think that they have one. And so far, I just went to the orchard yesterday, and the apples are massive compared to everything else up there. So I'm fingers crossed it's going to be the apple we've been looking for. So
Oh my God, it's a quest. I love it.
Yeah, it's been ongoing. My daughter started it. She was reading she was reading history about Palomar Mountain and came across this story about the Palomar Giant, and so it's become kind of an obsession between her and myself. Probably myself a little bit more, but
When did this start? How long has this been going on?
I think we're on 3 years now.
Oh, I
So
love
um,
that.
yeah, and the last 2 years, none of the trees that were suspected that could be it have fruited. So this is the first year where some of the suspects are actually fruiting. In fact, the one's fruiting very heavily. So, and like I said, that orchard has a lot of big apples, and the apples on this tree are 2 to 3 times bigger than any of the other varieties in the orchard. So I'm
Wow.
hoping,
Well,
fingers
hopefully, yeah.
crossed.
Yeah. So is your intent to sort of resurrect it, like take cuttings
Yeah,
and
I've already
propagate?
grafted out like 6 of the prospects that were out there, and already then figured out that 4 of those prospects were not it, and then one. Obviously, it hasn't fruited. None of the ones I've grafted have fruited yet, but one's from this area by the state park, and the other is from this tree at the Bailey orchard. So, and that's the one I felt really good about, and so I grafted actually I think about 8 trees on different rootstocks from that tree. So
Oh wow. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. I'm excited to find out. And
yeah,
this explains why when I did this post of these apples that I used for the cider that I made last year, that were as big as the head of my friend whose tree I
yes,
got them from, you were like, "Wait a minute, what's this? What is that variety?" But I think I'm pretty sure that it was just Fuji, and there were 2 freak giant apples on the Fuji tree that you
yeah.
said were.
I've done some research, and Fuji's can get up to I've read to get up 3-4 pounds at times.
Yeah, I
If you,
mean these were probably 8 inches in diameter. I mean it was insane. I was just
yeah,
like, I'd never seen apples like this. I mean, literally, it's big. Like we have a picture of her holding them up next to her head, and it's like It's like she has 3 heads. Um, uh, and yeah, but that's fun. I can't. Well, this will be fun. This will be exciting. I mean, do we know anything about the flavor? Historically, what people
I
talk about.
honestly have not found anything other than people talk about what a wonderful apple. I suspect it was probably a baking apple, to be honest with you. I don't
Yeah,
think it's going to be a cider fruit per se, but I just love the idea of finding something that possibly originated here in Southern California. Other than we're finding a lot of other seedlings and so on up in Julian, but this being
yeah,
something that was a popular apple, 100 plus years
right,
ago, I
right.
thought that'd be kind of fun.
Well, and for people who aren't from this area, or even people who are from this area and don't know, could you talk a little bit about the history of apples? I mean, I know Julian. I mean, I'm not that well versed, but I do know that Julian is known for its apples because the apples from Julian won a world fair competition in, like, I don't know when, the 1940s or something like that,
Yeah,
or
1930s or 20s, I forgot.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Julian, I believe the first orchards were planted up in Julian in the 1870s,
uh huh,
and then there's rumor that an orchard was planted on Palomar in the 1870s, but most of the stuff I can find that's reliable points to the late 1880s before they were planted there. But yeah, it's the Southern California used to have a huge apple trade, and like I know San Diego County's mountains, sold a lot of apples up into L.A. and then across San Diego as well back in the early 1900s. We're, I think, probably the primary one of the primary apple suppliers for those regions at the time. So
huh. And I mean that mainly because of the elevation, right? So it
yeah,
actually, you get this sort of temperate climate with cold winters, enough chill hours, because it's like, close to a mile high in places. Julian's around 4,000 something, right?
yeah, Julian, the orchards there are around 4,000 to like just over 5,000 feet is generally the range there. And then Guatai, which is where we manage the orchard, is just south of Julian, and it ranges from 3,900 to 4,000 feet. So yeah, you get in the wintertime, we get, even in our warm years, they still get like 1,000 plus chill hours up there. Years like this, there's just tons of chill hours. And the cool thing they get a lot more rain too because the mountains lift up. They pull a lot more moisture out of the clouds. So Julian area gets, I think, generally around about like 30 or so inches. Palomar can get up to around 50 to 60 inches of rain. In fact, if you go up
That's
there,
crazy.
it looks like someone took a mountain from Northern California or Oregon and plopped it down in the middle of Southern California because of how lush the mountain can be in places. In fact, it's just an odd side note. The only population of banana slugs south of Santa Cruz is on Palomar Mountain.
That's amazing. Honestly,
Yeah.
like that's I mean, those kind of rainfalls are insane. I mean, we get 10 inches in LA. You know what I mean? That's like our annual average is like 10 to 12, I think.
Yeah, even in
That's
Valley
crazy.
Store right now, we get, I think, well, we generally get about 14 or 15, but this last winter we got
Oh yeah.
roughly 25 inches here. So
Yeah, I think we set records this past winter, right? I
yeah,
think yeah, like all of California maybe. It's one of the wettest winters on record ever. Thus the fire blight.
yeah.
So can you talk about what goes into the peripheral and what trees you're getting from and how you make that? I'm just as one example of what you're doing. I just love to
Yeah,
hear.
there's one seedling pear down at the Watai orchard we take care of, and because a lot of those orchards when they're originally planted were the old orchardists planted seedlings, and then they grew up and then they grafted on what they wanted, and it's a tree where the original graft failed and the rootstock took off.
Oh,
And I know it was from like the period when pretty much everybody was doing that here. In addition, up in Julian, we find a lot of stuff like that. But in the orchard up there, we actually manage it for the Kumeyaay Land Conservancy Council, and it has these Lincoln pears all over it. And the Lincoln pears, you can just tell they've rolled down hills, and so in little hollows and all kinds of places where pears have collected, all these like baby pear trees have popped up just growing wild. So there must be, and it's funny because I talk to people on the East Coast and back there, they don't find near as many like wild pears as we get here. And then all around Julian, there's just pear trees that pop up in just odd places, like in, on a street corner where, and the guy's like, I don't, this pear's just been here for as long as our family's been here, and their family's been there since the 1800s, pretty much. So I mean, there's one in particular we just found this last year. I mean, I've been eyeing it for 4 years, but I met the family last year and they allowed us to harvest that and another pear that were both wild pears, and it's got just crazy acid and crazy tannins and a really good flavor. So we're really excited about that one. And then the other one up on the property, it's like that, but then once it blets, it becomes this incredibly delicious pear as well. So
this now I'm beginning to develop this theory that because I just found out how susceptible pears tend to be to fire blight. That the low pressure here is probably what makes it. Makes so many more of the seedlings survive to adulthood.
And we've had to, like at the orchard that we take care of up in Julian, the Moser orchard, we've had to, not all of them, but some of the pear trees we've had to do some serious cutting to cut back fire blight out of them in years past. And then the one thing I liked about that one I was talking about that was really high acidity and tannins, I've not seen any fire blight on it every year that I've watched it. So that's been really cool. And not all the pears up there are, like we used one this last year. We harvested a bunch of pears from it, and it turned out it didn't ferment. We blended it with pineapple quince and Wixon apples, and it made actually a really tasty thing. But on its own, it was not a very good perry. So.
Wow. Got it.
But you never know. But so all across Julian, we'll find like in odd places where just pears have rolled down from old trees and just grown a brand new tree. Usually a lot of times they'll have like multiple trunks. Sometimes there'll be a single trunk. But you can usually tell they'll have like some crazy shapes that they're generally not going to be a grafted variety.
Nice. So some of these ones that you get excited about, are you also propagating them? Like, do you have a
Yeah.
place where you can grow new things? And
Yeah, what I do is I'll take varieties and I graft them here, and I'll grow them for the first year at our place here in Valley Center, and then I'll watch them over winter, and I'll see. I'm always also looking for things that are more acclimated to lower chill, so I'll see what goes dormant and so on. If something goes dormant early, I'll keep like one or two of that variety here to see how they do as they go forward. And then the rest we'll take to the Guatai orchard. And we basically took a bunch of picking bins and filled them with soil and compost and wood and so on. And we have a nursery going up there. So that gives them a second year of growth before we put them out to the ground. As I learned my first year, we put 1-year-olds out, and the world's still a little harsh for 1-year-olds. So.
All 1-year-olds,
Yeah.
not just pears. It's a harsh world. Well, can you talk about mead and what that's like? Like, why mead, and how hard is that to sell, and how do you make it?
So it's kind of funny. Like, people ask me, why is your mead like so different than everyone else's? And I tell them I don't particularly like mead, so I figured out a way I could make mead that I could kind of enjoy. So, and when we first opened, I made like a couple of meads, and they were dry, and people just kept asking me, why don't you do sweeter things? And so I just kind of let the mead side be our sweet side of the business. So it keeps, when I get a group that comes in, it keeps the people who like sweet things happy, if that makes any sense. But that being said, we use all like raw honey. We use all locally, like all our everything that goes into our meads is either bought from farms. So a lot of times we buy their ugly or overproduced fruit that they can't get rid of.
Right.
And then, because who cares once it gets smashed up and turned into juice?
Yeah.
Or we forage things. Like I actually have a double project going with this. I did an elderflower mead this year, and then I'm doing a sparkling elderflower honey wine, which was all foraged elderflowers, and we fermented it on the wild yeast that's on the elderflowers. So,
with the honey,
the honey, yeah. So we basically drop the elderflowers and a little bit of Meyer lemon for acidity into there, and then we just let it go. And it took a week, but the yeast kicked off and fermented, and it actually tastes fantastic. So we're just going to add a little bit more honey and then bottle it and let it ferment naturally in the bottle as well. So I
was going to say, so you end up with a sparkling beverage with the meads as well.
Yeah, in the long run, that's going to be our plan. Yeah. So, and that's the direction I want to start going more with some of our meads is doing more projects like that with various fruits. Is taking the fruit, pressing them down, and then adding the honey into them, and kind of like a cizer or whatever. Like anything we do with like cysers and pyments, which is grape and honey co-ferment, those are all natively fermented as well. So we basically press the fruit down and add the honey in, and just let it go.
Nice. And can you get a little technical about how you retain the sweetness in the sweet ones?
So there's two ways. The stuff that we do on tap, in that case we stabilize the meads, because I want to keep the ABVs low, so it matches the ABV, not low per se, but low to in the range of our ciders, which is between 8 and 11%. And I'm not going to get a yeast to exhaust itself between 8 and 11%. So we'll stabilize those. First, we'll do chilling, and we'll do multiple transfers, and then we'll go to a sorbet to fully stabilize those mead. But
got it. Yeah,
we try and avoid it.
That was just I know.
But with our cysers and our with our cysers and our pyments, we make our starting gravity so high that the yeast will just die off before it ever ferments all the way.
Right. Got it. Yeah. So you have like a higher alcohol with a ton of residual sugar, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, they're basically dessert wines.
Right.
And like our cizer, we have one we call special cizer that we do that, and then we every year we get a fresh empty bourbon barrel and we dump it into that and we age it in that for another 6 to 9 months from a local distillery. So
Nice. So you mentioned the tap room. Where is that? Where can people come and?
we're in San Marcos. Currently, we're open Friday through Sunday because our tap room is very small and it's also our cidery. And we don't want people in there while we're driving forklifts, carefully through the place trying to raise and lower barrels.
Right. I don't know. I don't even understand why you would not want that. uh, well, and I mean, I should say, like, a lot of the bottles that I got from you were 500 milliliter, right? So you're doing these sort of smaller things, which also for the consumer means, like, I mean, I don't know. It's like, I love it. I don't know how other people will feel about it, but I think it's like I can try, 10 different things for you for the price that I might try 4 things from somebody else. And I thought your prices are incredibly reasonable. And at the cider, at the tap room, it looks like, I just looked at your chalkboard that you have online. It looks like the same. Like, you can do a little 4-ounce taste for like $3 to $4 for those, or you can spend like $9 or around $10 for a full big glass. I mean,
Yes, $8 to $9, I think, for 12-ounce pours.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I mean,
We're
that's
we're
lovely.
in the process of reevaluating that because we've had a lot of costs go up, and I've been trying to hold things, but our latest harvest is coming in to being released, and we experienced some increased costs from some of our, especially last year where we didn't have a lot of apples. We bought more,
Oh yeah,
and then a lot of our partners had to raise their prices for various reasons, and so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
been, we're at that point. We're having to look at it and reevaluate that a little bit, but it's tough because when we look at places across the country. In some areas, people are just like, "Oh my God, you guys are too expensive. I can't buy your cider," and so it's
Oh really?
yeah.
Wild.
So
I'm like, it's Southern California, people. What do you expect? How many? like,
and it's something different. You're not going to find what I don't think you're going to get the flavor profiles and the intensity of flavor that we get sometimes out of because of our apples
yeah.
having such high starting bricks. It's kind of a different animal.
Well, I'd also love to just sort of get your thoughts on cider as this Southern California beverage, because I think, like, when I think about like this heat, so we're in the middle of this sort of heat wave. That's not, I mean, I mean, the whole country's in the middle of a heat wave, but here in particular, we've had the hottest weather of the year for the past week. And I mean, the thing that got me the most excited this week was popping open 2 bottles of cider that I brought back from New York and finishing them, because like I actually could. They're low enough alcohol, they're light, they're refreshing, they're like, I don't feel heavy afterwards. I don't feel all heated up and everything from, a big bottle of something, and these are 750s. I are you what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I at the same time I say that, at the same time, to me, it's like this no-brainer. Like, it's a perfect thing for our hot weather. It's light, it's sparkling, it's refreshing. I don't find people embracing cider here the way that they embrace wine, for example. So and I work at this wine bar, and it's, the bar owners just have this experience of cider being, languishing, like just nobody ordering it. And do you think that is an education thing, like that the consumer is just not aware that cider can be what the cider is that you're making, and that I'm thinking of cider being, and that they're thinking of this sort of insipid, beer adjacent thing that they're used to getting, at a tap room that's not very good. It just is basically sweet and fizzy kind of thing? Or is it, or is it something else?
I think that's a lot of it, and I agree with you. I think cider is at least the type of cider we make, or like our friends at Calico Cider up in Julian or Storm Ranch, is a cider that's geared more towards a sunny day. Though our ABVs are a bit higher than, say, stuff you get from other parts of the country, we tend to start around 8%, but it's still, versus drinking wine, it's a much lower ABV alcohol. And I don't know what it is. I found I can more easily drink cider than I can drink wine or beer. So it's been I think it's a much better beverage for a hot day.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
the curse of being in San Diego is that San Diego still thinks that beer is king and that IPA is king. So it's a hard sell here. And I've actually found, I think a lot of the local bottle shops, there's some that have been really supportive, but the majority of them look outside of San Diego. I just did the Nat Diego, which is a natural wine festival here, and prior to that,
Yeah.
an event with all natural wine and cider makers there from here locally, and that was kind of the resounding thing from everybody, is that a lot of the local bottle shops don't really support the local producers, which I find incomprehensible, because when you look at areas where cider or the wine industries are doing fantastic, they're getting supported by local bottle shops, and that's something that's missing here in San Diego. We actually have more interest from places in LA, which is we're going to start trying to sell up in LA and Orange County much more than we do here in San Diego. So
Yeah, I mean, I also think definitely I want to reiterate that, just if you're a buyer, if you're on that, so if you're the distribution and sales side, like, you got to rethink the whole cider thing. Like, I mean, it's an amazing untapped opportunity. I think that people, I'm like, once you get a good, what I would consider natural dry cider, into somebody's hands, like, it will change their whole perspective on cider. And we have to stop marketing it as in the beer category. It needs to be in the sparkling wine category. And I think, especially even though your costs are high, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that if you have, like, that somebody, instead of doing a by the glass, you could do a by the bottle cider, like even a 750 or 500 maybe perfect, where it's like somebody can just open and crush like an entire bottle for the price that they might pay for, like, a glass of sparkling wine.
exactly.
And it's such a no-brainer to me. It's like, put it in there. It's like, oh yeah, try the cider. It's like, you don't get a glass, you get a bottle. And then and it's the same price. They can see it's like within $1 or $2 of the price of a nice sparkling wine on the list by the glass. And if it's a well done cider, and there's so many nice examples now on the West Coast. I mean, I'm speaking specifically West Coast. Like, forget about the East Coast. There's like so many good examples. But I mean, like, the whole marketing of it has been like, here's the beer and cider list, and it's like, it's not a beer, it's a wine, people. Like, let's get it out of the beer list. It like, as long as it's associated with that, I think people's minds won't be able to sort of wrap around like what its potential is, from the consumer side, like that it's actually this other thing.
If you want to go on a complete divergence, you will. I mean, it makes me so angry that people, even within the cider world, who try to equate, use beer terms for cider.
Yeah.
Session ciders and imperial cider really pisses me off. It's like any cider over 8%. I'm like, well, then everything I produce is an imperial cider almost. So cider. I mean, as far as the way we look at it, it should be an expression of the terroir. Our terroir tends to lend to higher ciders. Also, people hopping ciders and calling them India Pale cider, which is something that's never existed. I mean, they didn't hop cider to get from England to India, so I don't understand why you would call it an India Pale cider. So I mean, that whole thing of equating like beer terms into the cider world just pushes more of that perception that cider is a beer drink. In fact, I get people who walk in and go, can I get a cider beer? I mean, that don't know. It's frustrating. And on top of that, now we as the cider industry in California are fighting this legislation that we were uninformed of until it hit the governor's desk, that's going to allow breweries to, not just the O1, the large breweries, but all breweries to produce cider as well as beer. Because in the letter from the California Brewers Association, they said cider is made in the same manner as beer, and so brewers should be able to make cider. And so my whole point is like, wait a second, if no one's standing up, we unfortunately don't really have a cider association. This is finally spurring that to occur, I think, for California. But we've been trying to drum up opposition. I've had some of the local natural winemakers have said that they've called in or emailed in to oppose the bill. I think it's going to pass because it went through the legislature without any no votes. So I don't think that the governor is going to not sign it. But it's a travesty. It's an absolute travesty. And
why do you say that? I'm just curious what do you see the impact of that being?
Two things. First off, breweries that currently now buy cider from cideries for their tap lists where they have restaurants and so on are going to be, why do that when you can make your own cider? So the cideries that are supporting them are now going to be losing out on sales at that point. And then also, I think it's going to flood the market with more cheap, crappy cider because I don't trust that brewers are going to take the time to make a real cider. They're going to be making, I'll take Coronado Brewing, a case in point, they're in '01, so they've been able to make cider for a bit, but they've been making it from concentrate. And it's just, it's a bland, boring cider to me. And that to push that perception of cider into the market is just going to hurt the people like us that are trying to change that perception that cider is more like a wine than it's like a beer by far. So,
yeah. Huh.
So if you want, you can email Governor Newsom too.
Awesome. Anyone listening, there you go. For what good it will do.
The bill is SB 788 if you want to register opposition. So
SB 788. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you. That's kind of interesting stuff. Give me a second. I'm gathering my thoughts. You got me off onto politics here in my brain.
So, sorry, it's fresh because it only popped up here in the last week. So,
well, I love that your cidery is this family business, and that you have these now the generations. I guess when you were a young punk rock person, did you see yourself as a grandfather with a intergenerational cidery at some point in your life?
Not at all. I wasn't even sure if I was going to make it past 30 at one point. So,
yeah, that's awesome, and I love that. I love that your cidery sort of embodies all these phases for you. It seems like from childhood discovery of cider and punk rock and everything else, and to where you are now, this maturing person with a great. With a beautiful family, it looks like, and sharing all of these loves with them, and it seems like they've embraced it too. It seems like everybody's involved at some level. Are these full-time jobs for everybody, or does everybody, like yourself included, have something on the side that they're also doing?
We all have day jobs.
Yeah.
Myself and my son actually work. There's a family business that my father started, so we both work there. We're sheet metal workers during the day by day, and then we're cider makers and orchardists by night and weekend. So, and then my daughter actually works at the. So my son and my daughter are both partners with me in the business as well. And my daughter works for the county as an ag inspector, and she specializes in insects, which comes in really handy for us with pest control.
Ooh, very cool. Yeah. So, everybody needs one of those in the family, an entomologist.
Yeah, she's like, she was in my orchard yesterday. Oh, look, you got tons of lacy wing eggs and everything. I'm like, awesome, because this is, these are beneficial pests and are beneficial insects in the orchard that are popping up. So
awesome, great. Well, so what haven't we covered? What should I ask you about?
We could talk about how we actually farm our fruit and that sort of thing.
I would love to hear that. Yeah, like please. I mean, you said better than organic, and I was going to ask. Well, first, okay, one little side thing, because this was getting back to that. But when you thin fruit, have you ever considered using that fruit for like something? I mean, I know it's like super green and super malic, but have you ever considered throwing that into something?
I've actually thought about pickling it.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely thought, like that's nice little, like on some oysters, a little pickled apple, a pickled green apple kind of thing.
Yeah, so I thought about that. I talked to some friends. I remember them saying they tried to do up at Tilted Shed. They tried to make something with the thin fruit, and it wasn't very good. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. The way that I harvest the Fuji's to make cider, and it has made really beautiful cider. The couple of years that I've been doing it is I pick it when it's not thinning level of tartness, but it's pre-ripe. Like it is not, it hasn't reached dessert level of ripeness yet. So it's very, sharp, and it makes just like if so I'm just picking early and making beautiful cider out of Fuji's. We just happen to have enough on our tree and some neighbor trees too, and that I've just been like, well, this seems like a good strategy if you happen to only have access to sort of dessert apples and you're trying to make a really pretty cider and you don't want it to be flabby and insipid. Pick early or something like that. But then that also got me, because I'm out there thinning now as well, because we have big heavy, the branches are starting to bow down and everything with laden with apples, and I've been thinning and thinking, like, taking a bite and being like, could I use this thing like that? I'm like, can't even taste my tongue after I bite into it. But
they're pretty much all starch and acid at that point.
yeah, really tough. But I mean, they remind me of pears, like feral pears, and to a certain extent, like some of them anyway, like before bledding. So I don't know. This is where my mind went, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, we've taken fruit that's not quite ripe, and we've used that before, and it's done pretty well. Not obviously not as much flavor, but especially if you've got fruit that's not typically very acidic, it can work. And there's a crabapple we pick, the hyssop crabapple. We pick them probably a week before they hit full ripeness, because 1 week to 2 weeks, because we found they develop a lot of sorbitol as they hit full ripeness, which we don't want, because it's of the levels that it becomes uncomfortable when people drink the drink. Let's put it that way.
You mean like people have digestive issues afterwards?
Yeah, they have major digestive issues with it. So 1 year we harvested them late, and it was an issue. So we've harvested them probably about, and not only that, I found like by doing so, we get a little bit more brightness and acidity out of them, and the tannins don't become so intense. Like when they're extremely ripe, I mean, it took one of the ones that we did, the 2018 one, the tannins just now have started amalgamating or whatever, where the tannin chains get longer and they've softened. Yeah. But it was like kick you in the teeth tannins for the first like 3 years that we had that cider. So
that's amazing. Yes. Okay, cool. I got it with the sorbitol. So and now the benefit of sorbitol though is with a nice acidic pear, it's also, pears are known for having sorbitol. It's unfermentable, and you get like this perception of sweetness even when it's dry, and which can be lovely. It can be
oh, absolutely. The one you're talking about, the peripheral, I think it's like around about 1.3 or 1.4 bricks, if I remember correctly. I can't off the top of my head. And so it has a nice like sweetness that balances against the tannins and the acidity in that perry. But I really enjoy it. But as soon as you get up over 2 bricks residual sweetness, which is not from sugar but from the sorbitol, it's where you start to run into issues.
Got it. Right. This is why doctors prescribe pears for
exactly
for regularity.
In fact, early on we did a dessert perry, and our bathroom was a mess at the tasting room. So.
That's fantastic. Well, yeah. So you said better than organic farming. What does that mean for you?
I mean, in my mind, that we do biodynamic farming. We do no-till, and a lot of those principles I learned. There's a farm near us, anarchist biodynamic farm that we get fruit from as well. But I just started talking more and more with them and incorporating more and more of their farming ideals and the whole idea of no-till. Actually, a long time ago, I read a article about a guy up in the Central Valley that was taking animal waste and just spreading it and letting it rot in place. And he was developing like not inches, but feet of topsoil that was, he reduced like water usage over time by 2/3 to farm his land. Of course, you have to lay fallow to
let it break down. Yeah. For
exactly.
Like 100 days.
Yeah. When I started the year before we started our planting more apple trees here at our home orchard, I just started we have horses and donkeys and goats, and so I just started taking all that and spreading it over there on the soil and letting it just rot in place and layering like leftover hay and straw and whatever else I could get, and just let it all just start rotting in place on that side of the property for the first year. And then after we planted trees in the rows, down the center of the rows between the trees, away from the trees themselves, I continued that for another couple of years. And we've gone from where that soil was heavily just decomposed granite, to you can dig in now and you've got like this really rich organic soil over there that's, it holds so much more moisture. And then every year we plant like cover crops, and then mow them in, and just let that all just lay in place as well. So it's just continually adding to the soil over there.
Yeah, lovely. And
now we take our animal waste and we compost it, and now I just added night crawlers to my compost piles, which I wasn't sure how I was going to do, and I just dug in there yesterday, and there's these masses of night crawlers going through, and the soil has just turned this beautiful black soil in the compost pile. So.
Oh, interesting. So are night crawlers as good as like the red wrigglers?
They're a secondary composter. So the red wigglers are a primary composter, more or less. So I actually have red wigglers in a thing in my garage right now doing primary composting of vegetables and so on, and then that'll also get turned into soil for our orchard. But the night crawlers, for once we've composted traditionally, throwing those in there, it seems like they're just turning the soil even richer than it was before. So.
Huh. Oh man, that's something.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
And then we also spread tons of wood chips. So we always, like this winter, I was really excited because I would dig through and there's just so much mycelium growing through the soil. Don't even get me talking about mushrooms because I'm a complete mushroom nerd. So, there was mycelium everywhere in the soil. So that was really exciting to see as well. So just more things turning the soil into compounds that the trees could use.
And that is the benefit of wood chips, right? Because you're giving cellulose that is a mushroom food and creating this profungal environment in the soil, which is great for perennials. That's the idea, right? Is that a Michael Phillips technique that you learned, or was that just something that?
No, that was more came from reading Stamets a long time ago. Though I don't know everything he does, but just reading about how the wood getting turned back into soil for the trees in the forest, and so I kind of incorporated that idea into our orchard.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, I mean, it's a little off thing, but I was going to ask you about any of the mushrooms that you might have found as you're traipsing about the mountains there looking for feral trees or wild seedlings. Have you encountered stuff? I know like morels are usually associated with apples. Have you found any morels or anything like that?
No morels. So I hear on Palomar that there are morels. I haven't actually found any myself, other than you can find the landscape morels which grow. They're actually not a mycorrhizal mushroom. They're a composter. You can find those sometimes in landscape like wood chips. But we find there's oysters, lion's mane. There's some edible varieties of agaricus, and then there's which is similar to the button mushroom. We found what the really cool one we found in the orchard that we manage up in Julian is called a liver bolete. Suilelis. My daughter knows the Latin better than I do, but it's a delicious edible that they tasted kind of like slices of steak. We just cut them up and sauteed them, and they were super delicious. So we're eyeballing for those forever now, since we found the one. They came up right after that hurricane remnant thing went through San Diego County. And there's some other, like we get blanking on the name right now, but there's another bolete that grows all over the place here associated with the oaks. It's super delicious. And then there's reishi and turkey tail and there are medicinals, and turkey tail you can actually cook and make a broth from, and they're super delicious in a broth. there's quite a number of mushrooms. Of course, for Southern California, so it's more arid, so we don't get the diversity of mushrooms that they get in Northern California. Oh, you can find chanterelles here and some other boletes as well. So
Wow, that's still pretty impressive. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I just don't. Yeah, I've been looking north. I got to start looking south. I think it's even closer to where
yeah.
I am to get to mountains and all this kind of stuff. So it's
Oh
fun.
yeah, there's good stuff up all around LA too, up in the mountains. Once you get out into areas where there's kind of undisturbed old like growth forests and so on, you can find all kinds of really awesome things. Especially in the live oak forest. There's a lot of good stuff,
Oh yeah, yeah, true.
and the crossovers between live oak and manzanita too. There's some really cool stuff. So
Oh yeah, that's true. I love manzanita. I think it's such a
yeah,
beautiful plant. I mean yeah. I mean yeah, stunning.
that's actually
Especially.
the habitat for the liver boletes I was talking about is
Oh, you're kidding me. Oh man.
manzanita oak. So.
It's like a fairy tree to me. That's
Yeah,
awesome. That's so cool. I mean, it's not even like a tree for years. It's just like so slow growing. Isn't it? It's the one with the red wood, right? Like the red
yeah, it's got
trunk.
the
Yeah.
redwood on that. There's two. There's Madrone, which is more than Northern California, and then Manzanita, which is kind of like a bushy tree here in Southern
Right.
California. So
Yeah. Gorgeous. Yeah, I've seen some big ones like in Sequoia where they've grown. Yeah, I mean they're probably really old, but
those might be Madrone because they look
okay,
similar as the wood looks.
okay,
So
and they're more tree-like. The
yeah,
madrone.
yeah.
Got it. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Fun.
so and we've even in our orchard here, I've inoculated the wood chips with wine cap mushrooms, which are a really tasty edible, and they
Yeah.
break the wood chips down into like super beautiful black soil. So
Oh wow. And you had no problem with that? Do you have to like? I mean, is it? Are you
it's so
keeping?
it depends on the year. If during the
Yeah.
summer, if it's a really hot, dry year, they sometimes will survive, sometimes they don't, and then I have to re-inoculate. If but most years, some will survive, and then they'll start popping up again the next year. So
Nice. So they help compost when it's when the conditions are right, and then you get to eat them as well.
exactly, I do a lot
Nice.
of stuff like that. Our winter cover crops, I'm always planting like fava beans and then I also put in. Different cabbage type plants. They'll drive like really big, deep roots in, so they open the soil up, and we actually will plant wheat and then I've been this coming winter. I'm going to plant more wheat for a friend of mine that has a bread sourdough project where he's trying to regrow the wheat growing areas down here so that he can locally source wheat for his sourdough. So
Oh,
he's been doing
amazing.
testing with different varieties, and so in between my trees, I'm going to plant a bunch of wheat, and they'll just live off of the winter rain. So
Sounds very Italian, I got to tell you. um, that whole area. I mean, and that style sounds like the old. I mean, there's still farms like that, but these are like the old pre-modern era, the Etruscan farming style for like 3,000 years was that alley cropping system with fruit trees and vines and spaced and wide things so you could farm between them and run graze animals between them as well. Um, you now I'm just going back to the cabbage. What are the cabbage crops like? I don't I scattered like
mostly
go ahead.
like kales
Yeah,
and what's the it's
collards.
the collard greens, yeah, collard
Yeah,
greens and so on. So
I
and
found. I mean, I found this really cool thing that happened with collards where I just scattered a ton of seed. Traditional cover crop seeds, clovers and vetches and rye and peas and then a bunch of flower seeds and then also a bunch of vegetable seeds. And it has been really cool to see the succession of like what pops up when and what resows and stuff like that. And what I found was like all the traditional cover crop, which is why they're traditional cover crops, sort of took over and dominated right at the beginning. We had the peas and clovers and rye really like close out everything. But as they started dying back, I found the collards popping up, and the collards just have loved it. Like they've just thrived, and even like I'm not watering like or very little watering, so it's like we just have heavy clay that these collards are getting huge on just the inner what's left over after everything else dies back. It's really cool. to see.
Yeah, and we found the same thing. And even without in the areas where I don't water in between the trees, the collards will still just keep surviving. I mean, it's near 100 degrees out there, and they're still cranking away. There's not a ton of them, but they're there, And
right, yeah.
I mean, I normally in years past, I've just switched up my watering system, and I'm experimenting with something new because, as you know, Southern California water is king, and so I'm trying to. I tried like a drip tape method, running 3 rows of drip tape along each row of trees, and it worked out right. But I don't think I was getting the advantages I wanted to. But I was able to farm more between the trees because of the drip tape.
Right.
So last year we grew tons and tons of cowpeas and tomatoes and squashes and things. And I was looking to try and create like a thing where I got a living green compost or coverage basically to help. You ever notice like when you have squash plants or whatever where they've got dense foliage and you touch the ground underneath, it tends to stay moister than the ground around it. So I messed around with that concept, but I'm back to mostly watering the trees and a few other. I have some asparagus planted out there because I like asparagus.
Nice. Yeah. So. No, and do you have enough water for asparagus? It seems like it. I mean, I guess you have to irrigate, right?
When I want to irrigate for the trees, it seems that because their roots are deep, so I do when I do irrigate, it's a long watering, and then I try and let it go for a long time because again, like I said, I've built up mounds of wood chips around the trees and so on, so it helps to keep moisture in the soil. So the asparagus seems to like it.
Nice. And have you messed around with anything like tepary beans or some of those?
Yeah, I did tepary beans, especially last year. So there's a guy here in Valley Center that is Rancho del Rey, I think, beans, and he has tons of tepary beans and different bean crops that. So I've gotten some from there and planted them when we're going to get the fall rains from the monsoon and let them just water because that's basically what they're designed for, is to get water by monsoon rains. That's their natural habitat. So I'll just stick them out there when we know we're going to get monsoon rains. It varies from year to year here. So
that's very cool.
Yeah.
Now, and where you're planting them is they're
in the orchard. Just in the areas between the trees, where it's just kind of arid and dry.
So just so I have a sense and everybody else does, what is the spacing and how old are the trees?
My trees they're not super old right now. They vary from, I just planted some out there and replaced. When I first planted, I didn't put anything in to protect for gophers. So the gophers have taken out quite a few trees. So I've been replanting year to year with new trees or trees that just didn't make it because they're not really adapted to the hot, dry conditions. So I've got trees that are out there that are like 6-7 years old, and I've got trees out there that are 1 year old. So it just really, it varies.
So what's the spacing?
I've ran them at 14 by 12 because I don't have a lot of room here. We're only on 3 acres. So
got it. Yeah. And so when they mature, they'll fill in, and do you think you'll be able to do as much cropping, or are you going to prune them? What's your plan as they mature?
As they mature, I'm going to kind of gauge the area and see what it looks like, and see what I can and can't do. It's going to probably end up, I don't know if you ever seen, like, I was talking with Scott from Tilted Shed. They gave me a lot of input early on when I was starting.
Got it, yeah.
And they've planted a lot of they have a little bit wider spacing between the rows, but less spacing between the trees. And if you look at their home orchard, it's the same type of thing. The trees are not huge, and I started on M111 rootstock and have been switching over to B118 for a lot of the trees I graft now, and then recently I've been just going to Antonovka and P18, which are full standards, because just more and more looking at the old orchards here, the ones that survive and do well with zero water are all seedling, or full standard trees, with minimal or or zero water. So that's kind of the direction we're going at this point is moving that way. And you can always control the size of the trees with pruning, with summer pruning. So
Right. Good point. I love that. Now, what else are you doing? Well, you made me think of something predators. Is it fenced off to prevent
where
things
I'm at,
predating?
we don't have deer, so
Okay.
we had deer, but I haven't seen deer in years. I did have an issue. I did an experiment, and we have a riverbed along the bottom of our property, and it's like this year it's ran until just probably about a week ago, from all the rains we got. But it's a corridor, so we get mountain lions and bobcats and coyotes and all that move through that riverbed. But
they're not consistent enough to keep the gopher problem from being a problem.
No. The gophers are more like the birds, and then hopefully my cats. Though my cats are fat and lazy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but you need some king snakes, maybe.
I know. Oh no, believe me. Anytime I find a king snake, I bring them home and release them on property. I just saw one a little while ago, and gopher snakes. We have those around, and rattlers too. So they all hunt gophers. And then I've been hunting them, but mostly in the orchard area. I mean, gophers. I've been putting my trees in gopher cages now, so that keeps them off. And gophers have a job to do, and one of the things they do is they create an intermix of deeper soils back up to the surface and help to aerate the soil. So they're not a terrible thing to have. It's just when you're trying to grow a crop, they like to eat them. They like to eat the same type of things that we do, basically.
Yeah. They also, I guess, with rain, provide water infiltration into the deeper soil, right? And
exactly. And oxidation and all that stuff. So, I mean, it's the same thing you're trying to do with cover crops. With, when you mow in a cover crop, and when you've got the stuff that's got the deep roots, like daikon radish or even the cabbages and so on, as those roots shrink, then they're aerating the soil and allowing more for moisture to get into the dirt and basically creating a better piece of land. So
yeah. Well, as much as I'm complaining about the raccoons in my backyard, I'm also finding them digging up the grubs that become the beetles that eat the grapes in about a month. And so I'm like, well, I mean, there is a trade-off. They're not, the beetles won't eat them. The raccoons might eat them, but at least they're saving me from the beetles. Which are harder to scare off.
We get the fig eater beetles. We get those, we have chickens, and the chickens, when they find the grubs for those, it's a feed frenzy. They love them.
yeah. Their prehistoric instincts come out. Carnivorous pterodactyls. Yeah, that was the nice thing about having chickens too, and why I let them in the vineyard longer than I probably should have. Yeah, they do.
But and we do all that here, and that's all here at our place. We also have the orchard at Watai. We're not there that much. I mean, it's within San Diego County, but it's about an hour drive from here, so we're there less. But one of the things we've been doing there, I mean, we work with the people who own the property. They actually do a lot of the mowing, but we're going to be moving more to planting cover crops during the winter, though they have a pretty decent native cover crop that already grows there. Nice. We're just going to add some stuff to it. And then there's a mushroom farm on that property as well. And so we've been able to get a lot of the leftover mushroom, what do you call it, spent mushroom.
The substrate. Yeah.
Substrate. And we spread that around and let that all rot in place. And again, that's a great, it's lots of cellulose from the straw and the wood chips and so on that we use. So that's all great for the soils there in the orchard as well.
Yeah.
So those are things we're doing there. And that one there, that valley is kind of crazy. It's a rarity here in Southern California, but the valley is full of water. So that orchard is actually able to be irrigated all from well water and good well water. The problem is you get sometimes a lot of places here, the water is relatively shallow and it's fairly salinic. And so the apple trees don't like it. Orange trees like it, but apple trees don't like it.
That's right. Yeah, there are some great orange groves down that way as well.
Yeah.
And avocado. What?
Yeah,
So,
avocado's disappearing a little bit because of the water issue, but
got it. Yeah. Well, what else? I mean, so you mentioned chickens and gophers. Do you have any other critters that are living in there? It sounds like you could be
yeah, we have goats.
grazing.
But
Goats? Okay.
the goats and the donkeys we keep away from the orchard because they also like to eat the trees and strip the bark. So,
Sure,
but
sure.
we use their waste.
Right. Great. Yeah. Yeah. They're intense, both of them.
Exactly. In fact, we took the orchard over in Julian, and the guy who was kind of watching the orchard before us was a rancher and was running his cattle in there. But that was one of the reasons that the tribes were looking for someone else to take it over, is because the cattle were just destroying the trees. They were stripping the bark off the trees and so on. So when we took it over, there was and the orchard had been abandoned basically for 30 years. So. It's been a major rehab job, but I feel like it's on the up. Every year it's looking a little bit better. I mean, we've had a couple of inclement years with weather, but I think this year looks pretty decent. I think next year is going to be a really good year in that orchard.
Oh, fantastic! So, what was the tribe? So this is on like reservation land?
No, there's this. The Kumeyaay Land Conservancy Council, which is
you mentioned that. I was gonna ask,
all the tribes within the council, within the county, they have, or most of the tribes, they have this group where people, if they're going to pass away and they don't really have heirs that they want to leave land to, or they want to make sure their land is never developed, they can leave land to this Kumeyaay Land Conservancy Council, and they guarantee that the land will never be developed. So it's kind of a cool idea, and they had this orchard that they were looking for someone to really take care of. So,
got it. So the land can be made productive, can be farmed, but not developed into like.
Well, we're not adding to the orchard, but we're taking care of the orchard. So in that case, in that orchard, we mow it. And in fact, I just did that a couple of weeks ago in the heat while my tractor was overheating. But I got that mowed in before everything turned completely brown. And then we will chip like dead wood. I mean, what we'll do is any dead wood or prune wood, we'll save it up. And then when we have a bunch, we'll take a wood chipper in there, and then we'll chip mounds of wood chips around the trees to basically rot in place and conserve moisture in the soil. And then we harvest. And that's pretty much about all we do in that orchard. But
so it's sort of like a zero input?
Oh, absolutely zero input.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything we do, I mean, we have even the Guatai orchard in here, I mean, other than doing, some like sprays of compost teas and so on, we're pretty much zero input into everything. So,
yeah. That's great.
And there's actually, that was the cool thing in Julian. There's a lot of kind of old orchards where, I mean, there's part of our project was to help to rebuild orchards. So there's some orchards where we've been working with people, and like there's one where they actually came back to us and are like, what trees do you want us to plant? And so they've actually not only taking care of their old trees, but are now have like planted like cider varieties for us specifically to be able to use in our cider making. So that was kind of a neat thing because looking at the Julian area, the orchards were just in decline. And the nice thing about it is between us and then now Calico opening and then Storm Ranch, there's like this a little bit of an excitement about that area where people are starting to take care of their orchards a bit more and not let them be plowed under or whatever. So it's really cool. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, because some of these are really old historic orchards, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's one tree in one orchard that's an old Gravenstein that was planted. It's supposedly the oldest living tree in Julian. That was from the 1880s, I believe. Wow. So it's really cool to look at because the trunk is like hollow, but like the outside of the tree is still there around the base of the tree, and then it's just this massive Gravenstein tree. So
that's so cool. God, you, again, made me think of something that I was going to ask you, and then got distracted by the 100-some-year-old tree. 100. Hold on a second. I'm just laughing because I'm not laughing, but I'm imagining, I am laughing. I'm imagining East Coast apple growers are hearing us and just getting madder and madder by the minute, like listening to how easy you sort of have it here. Like all the, I mean, not that it's easy, not that any farming is easy, but, relative to the pressures that they have to deal with and, we don't have deer. We don't really have fire blight occasionally.
Well, let's take that back. I don't have deer at my home orchard. We have deer everywhere else.
Right,
like,
right. Yeah.
Orchard, the owners didn't want to put deer fence in around the orchard for the first almost 4 years we were there, and so I was getting a little discouraged because of the depredation we were looking at on the trees, and so last year they finally allowed us to put deer fence up around, and so now the trees are finally taking off. So I feel much better about it because there's at one point I was like, am I just a bad orchardist, or is it just that we need to get these trees protected, which is what it was. But I was really feeling bad about the way the trees looked for a while there. So, but depredation, and we have to deal with fire blight on and off, and we have codling moth, and we've got a number of other pests that have been hitting lately. Talking to a couple of the orchards up in Julian, where there's a new, I forget the name of it right now, but it's a something worm that's been getting up. It's not stuff that bothers us, like codling moth doesn't really bother me because as far as damage to the apples, that doesn't really affect what we do, but for the people who are growing fruit for U-picks or for selling to market and so on, that there are a number of pests that they're having to deal with. So
right,
and there was a weird fungal hit this year too, but that was I think due to the extreme amount of moisture. So
yeah, which maybe we'll see more of in the future, but it's probably not going to be the regular.
It'll be dead dry, then super wet. We're never going to get anything close, I think, to normal.
Right. Yeah, I think that is the new. Yeah, I hate saying that.
That is the new normal.
Yeah. So, is there anything else that you're doing that's unusual relative to what is normally done in orchards?
No, I mean the only other thing I touched on a little bit earlier is that we've been grafting local seedling varieties of apples and pears that we found that are useful to us for what we do, and with a kind of a concept of creating this a cider and then a perry that is truly San Diego County. Based. It's these are varieties that started here and exist here. They're not only existing here because I've done trades with people back on the East Coast like Black Duck Cidery, Floral Terrains, with Benford, and then with Rose Hill with Matt and who else? I'm trading next year with I think it's Left Bank. I forget. I got to go back and look at my notes. And Greenpoint Cidery. For varieties that they have, and so I'm also really interested in finding wild varieties that they have that may do well here, and then sending some varieties we have here, so maybe they'll grow up somewhere else in the world and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, but essentially developing a local regional, cider culture, basically. Exactly. That's locally adapted and for that place.
Well, and that's it. And I've gotten some pushback from people going, "Oh, they're doing well there because they're seedlings and they're on their own roots." And I'm like, "Yeah, but they also, even though that is the case, and they're going to be more drought tolerant because of that, they also produce in our environment where that's not always the case. I mean, and we have lots of failed apple plantings where we have trialed varieties that just don't do well here in Southern California. But then we have other varieties that are completely unexpectedly doing, like Nihao, which is originally a French cider apple. It's a bittersweet, and it produces apples like berries. I mean, it's just crazy how many apples they produce. So, and we've had pretty decent luck with Calaus, and we've been planting a lot of Spanish varieties because first off, I love Spanish ciders. But we have the same similar soils, though a different growing. We have warmer winters, but our summers are drier and hotter than they are in the Spanish cider growing regions or apple growing regions.
Right. Yeah.
But we're trialing them and seeing what happens and what does well and what doesn't. So
Great. Awesome. Well, great. I'm glad we came back on to discuss all this. This is fantastic.
yeah, and the good thing is my daughter's house isn't burning down and didn't need to be evacuated. So
whew, that is the good news. Yeah. Well, and then just for the record, you want to give your Instagram and website for people to get in touch with you and buy cider?
Yeah, our website is ragingcidermead.com. Our Instagram is at raging_cider. And then I think we're just Raging Cider on Facebook. So for awesome. The old people who still use Facebook.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate it. This is great.
All right, thank you. And if you're ever heading to San Diego, touch base with me. I'd love to hang out and show you.
You're going to be my first call for sure, definitely. I mean, I'm planning a trip. It's just when to schedule it in with my crazy life right now, but it's happening. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I wanted to end with this thought. As I think about two responses to what is happening in the world, climate crisis and other crises that converge and really are scary for a lot of us, as they should be. One way that we can respond is by thinking about how we can get away from it all onto our own piece of land and form a homestead and be able to survive by ourselves. And, when the collapse comes, we'll have everything we need right there on our little farm. That's one way of thinking about it. And, there's some merit to that. I mean, I definitely think about that. I mean, this is one way my mind goes. The other thing that I think is a really important idea in regenerative farming, in permaculture, in all of these ways of looking at the world and improving the world and moving towards a future that is actually where there actually is a future, is to remember that part of regenerating, part of permaculture is community. This is a huge, important aspect. And at no point has a single organism on planet Earth, human or otherwise, survived on its own when the shit came down. We need each other. The more desperate times are, the more we need each other. And I encourage you all to consider what you can do to build a stronger, more vital, more vibrant community right around you, and how you can, rather than flee, put down deeper roots that will enable you to withstand whatever comes, to be resilient and adaptable because of the support, the care, the love that you share with the people right around you, neighbors, friends, family, and your regional extended relationships. Just wanted to leave you with that thought. Thank you for listening.